So for the sake of being entirely transparent, I didn't get the right version of this. So I didn't realize that there was a 1958 version and a 1983 version. I got the 1983 version. I have seen the 1958 version. It's just been a hot minute. 1958 version was released 2 years after the book was originally released. The book was written by Shichiro Fukuzawa. I have not read the book, unfortunately. I could not find a translated copy that was available for me. So I just kind of went with what I had. So even though I will briefly be discussing the 1958 version, I definitely recommend watching that one. I also recommend watching the 1983 version if you have not. They're both very good. It follows the same basic principle. I think most of the major beats, it's just, this one feels a little bit more brutal. So, yeah. That's a forewarning. My main thing in talking about these two movies is I wanted to talk a little bit about the historical context before we get into the actual movie. I'm not going to be giving you a time code to skip this because I did get a degree in history. This is horror historian is not just me being, I'm a genius. But my minor in my speciality is East Asian history, specifically Japanese history. And shout out to my professor who actually introduced me to the Ballad of Narayama during a Women's in Japan class. During 1958, Japanese people were still trying to get their lives back together. 2 atomic bombs had been dropped onto major cities. They had lost the war, Americans had taken over the country and shuffled up the entire government, and the identity of being Japanese was shifting. Yes, there was more money being poured into the country, one of the reasons that this movie was able to be made, but it's also the beginning of the economic boom that Japan will experience up until the 1990s. And in 1983, the economic boom that Japan experienced was solidifying. There was nowhere to go but up for the Japanese at this point. They haven't yet hit the downwards trend that will hit once the 1990s happen. But what I did think was interesting was that also in 1983, Barefoot Gen was released as an animated movie. Barefoot Gen was originally a manga that detailed the experience of the mangaka who was living in Hiroshima at the time that the bomb dropped. Most of his family did not survive, and it's an incredibly brutal portrayal of humanity and the nuclear fallout. I also recommend reading that. I only have the first 2 books, but I believe there are 10 in total. But it's totally worth the read. I just don't think it's coincidence that these 2 pieces of media that really showed the brutality of the everyday human was a coincidence. I think, and thankfully, as far as I can tell, the director of the 1983 version of The Ballad of Narayama was not at Nagasaki or Hiroshima, so at least he did not have that incredible hardship to deal with, but he still lived in Japan during an incredibly tense time, dealing with incredibly, quick changing things. And I don't think it's coincidence that these are conversations that are being had in the 80s. I think for these 2 different pieces to be made, people are processing the grief of what they went through. The director and writer of the 1983 version is Shohei Imamura. The stars are Ken Ogata, Sumiko Sakamoto, and Shoichi Ozawa. Before we get into this movie, I do need to talk about Ubatse. The piece of folklore stems from a Buddhist allegory about a man carrying his mother on a walk. I think they're going up a mountain. The act is basically abandoning an elderly person in an area that they can't physically leave, so they will die of exposure or starvation, depending on how lucky they are. If this was practiced at all, it wasn't nearly to the extent as it is shown in this movie. Once again, if it was done, it was probably through times of extreme famine. Trigger warnings for death, abandonment, child abuse, murder, starvation, and poverty. The movie is based around Orin during the 70th year of her life. She is the matriarch of the Nico family, and we meet her during a particularly rough winter. So she's not having a great time. Nobody is. So despite being, the everyday person during the 1800s and 70 years old, she's in really, really good condition. Her teeth are really strong, and that's noted in particular because usually when teeth start not being great, it's usually a sign that someone is declining in health. But she's doing fine. Her primary task during the day, it seems, is to be taking care of the little boy who, her grandson. Unfortunately, the mother had passed away the past spring. She had actually fallen down a cliff. The first major scene in the movie involves the youngest son, Risuke, also known as Stinky. He comes across a baby that was thrown onto the land, and I'm not entirely certain if the child was dead at the time it was left outside or not. He goes to a few families to try and find out where the baby had come from. It's important to note that he wasn't doing this because he was upset that it had been done at all. He wanted to yell at them for putting it on his family's land. I really cannot express how brutal this movie can be, so once again, I am leaving like a little hey, this is a reminder, this movie's pretty brutal, and it's a very difficult way to look through that lens, and it can be a little overwhelming at times. While the Nico family does have respect, they certainly could be doing better. They are one of the people that gather for decisions to be made, and they work hard in the community fields. The major thing that drags the family down is an incident when Oren's husband struggled to assist his mother to the mountain. Her husband just kind of disappeared. Oren never got remarried after her husband left, and at this point he's just assumed to be dead. Like, it's been 30 years. She raised her children entirely by herself, and she never got remarried. What is surprising is that Oren does still care about that man. On the other hand, she carries the burden of what the community thinks of her and the family because of what happened. She's also very aware of her stand in the community because she's been dealing with her husband's mistake for 30 years entirely by herself. The past relationship is stirred up when a salt merchant makes a comment about seeing her husband on the hill while coming into town. It is explained through that backstory that also Tatsuhei, the oldest son, looks a lot like his father. Her husband had been missing for a while, and she doesn't have much hope that he has lived this long. The salt merchant is mostly there to try and get her to agree to marriage between a widowed woman from the next town and Tatsuhei. She does end up agreeing to the offer, although she is at first thinking that he's trying to buy her grandchild. Because that's apparently something that salt merchants just do. It's important to note that Oren is not the only old person in the village. There's actually an old man of one of their neighbors. He is the grandfather, and he is not being treated well. I'm not entirely sure if he has dementia or if there's just issues stemming from his son's abuse that is making him seem a little more out of it. It's basically tied up and kept in like a side room and starved. So I'm gonna talk about him a lot later because he becomes an it's a very difficult part of the movie. It's clear to Oren that she is going to take the next year to wrap up loose ends that she had in her life. That is what a lot of this movie is about. So be prepared for me to talk a lot of relationships and how things don't always turn out the way that they should. The oldest son, Tatsuhei, marries the woman offered from another village. Oren seems pleased with that woman that is going to become the matriarch of the family once Oren has been brought to the mountain. As time goes on with this new daughter-in-law, it becomes clear that she is ready to take the reins from Oren. She's a very strong and tough woman, so Oren is not that concerned about her taking over, and it's helped by the relationship between the married couple being generally pretty good. The issue that Tatsuhei is actually dealing with is more about bringing his mother up the mountain. He's struggling to do what Oren asks him to do, and he's having a hard time agreeing to it, something his father also struggled with, so not only does he look like his father, but his mother is concerned that he is going to end up like his father. Speaking of Oren going up the mountain, that was her own personal task that she had to go through. Part of it was convincing everyone around her that it was getting to be time for her to go. When we meet her, she's this whip-smart, aware of the world, and hard-working person that the family desperately needs to keep moving things forward. She's aware that she's a mouth to feed for the family, even though she's helping put food in their mouth. But she is ready to make space for another mouth in the family, which, like, wives and children. It's one of the most difficult moments for me to watch. Oren tries to bash her teeth in. The first time she tries, she doesn't really have her heart in it, but the second time, she basically curb stomps herself against a stone. That is so that people will start to think that her health is declining and agree with her assessment that it's time for her to go. When other villagers, especially children, start noticing that her teeth are gone, they start running around her singing, and they're singing about Onibaba, which is a demon woman. I think specifically they're talking about the Yamauba? Yamaba? That's probably it. Yamaba sounds better. Which is a cannibalistic mountain demon woman. So I think that's probably a little bit closer to what they were going for. So, Stinky is probably the oddest task that Orin has to take on before her year is over. It's well known that he smells bad. Everyone comments on it throughout the movie, although it does seem at times people overemphasize how much he smells. But he's a virgin at his big age. It's also a well-known fact that he is having sexual relationships with a neighbor's dog. Orin probably thought this was an easy solution when a woman is told by her dying husband to basically share what she had with the whole village. But for reasons I understand, the woman decided that she was going to skip over Stinky. In a scene that was amusing, the woman claimed that her husband had visited her in the form of a butterfly and asked her to skip over Stinky, because that's something that she felt required to beg her dead husband for. Orin finally gets someone to agree to have sex with Stinky, and it's an older woman that started the movie closer to death. Like, she was sick to the point where the brothers had built a coffin for her, except when they showed up to take her, she was fine. When she was sick, she made a comment to Orin that she was jealous that Orin was going to be healthy enough to make it up the mountain. So although the mountain seems to have conflicting views, the older people certainly see it as an honor. But this woman does agree to have sex with Stinky while Orin's going up the mountain. So at least that was finished, and this woman's mostly surprised that her vagina still worked. So that was also good news for her. His middle brother ends up giving Orin her biggest mess of the year, and Orin must make some hard decisions. From the beginning of this movie, his brother was having a sexual relationship with a young woman with a birthmark on her face. She's more of a free spirit and not interested in doing what a woman or a future mother is meant to do in this culture. I thought they were fine for the most part until we find out that she is mostly hooked up with him so that she can steal from the Nico family to feed her own. There are a ton of kids in that household, but they've also been stealing a lot more than they needed, which is revealed to us when they get caught. At first, all the food is taken from them, and the village basically just shames them. The girl is still living with the family and continues to quietly steal from them, although maybe not as overtly as she had, just eating more than they can give. Maybe this is the reason that Orin decides to push for them to be punished more harshly, and stops the family from stealing from anyone ever again. That night, after Orin has sent the girl home with food for her family, the village comes together and violently tears the family from their home. They then bury the family alive, including the children. The middle brother is obviously upset that his pregnant partner is gone, but at the same time, Orin doesn't need to worry about the girl taking advantage of the family. He ends up moving on quickly, if we're being honest, and this woman is much more acceptable to join the family, although she is not revealed until after Orin has gone up the mountain. So Orin makes the announcement that she will be heading up the mountain the next day. There are a few more things that I want to talk about, so we're going to put that on pause for a little bit. So I can ramble a little bit. Things change a lot when they go up the mountain. There's a lot more... It doesn't feel like two separate movies, but it's definitely like, this is Act 3. Throughout the movie, there are scenes cut in with animals being animals. So they're eating, copulating, giving birth, fighting, hunting, and other things that you expect for animals to do. This helps to really emphasize the thesis that is humans and animals don't have that much of a difference, even as humans try so hard to prove that they are civilized. An animal that I'm going to mention is snakes. They are an embodiment of the god of the house. There's one in every house in this village. We often see them coming and leaving the house, often showing that there is bad luck, or the family members have done something to cause the snake to leave. Considering the only version of this movie I had seen before was from the 1950s, I was very surprised by how explicit this movie is. There is a lot of sex and nudity, and a weird amount of playing with nipples. There are two separate scenes where they kind of change how they film, and I'm not sure if the vibrating sound was meant to sort of add to the ambiance, or if that was what they used to shoot the scene. Either way, I was not a fan of it. It didn't really work if it was meant to make it unsettling. It just kind of made it loud. When Orin is preparing to go up the mountain, it's not like she can just be carried up and dumped by the side of the road. I mean, she can be, but there is this entire ritual that they need to go through in order to be successful going up the mountain. They can't talk while they go up, but the only person that follows that rule is Orin. Tatsuhei ends up breaking the silence a few times, but it's a somber time, so he does mostly remain quiet. They are given the directions to Nara Mountain, but Tatsuhei is secretly told that there is an area he can leave her, and it's, close enough. They also can't look back, something that once again Tatsuhei didn't do. He even goes back at one point. So, for going up the mountain, Orin is wearing a white outfit. This tends to symbolize death more than purity, which is often how white is used in Western cultures. This is something that you would see when someone is being put to death in another context. She's also not wearing shoes, which is probably a way to make it more difficult for someone to get out of there. But also, you don't really need shoes when you're going to die. There's a lot of time of just going up the mountain, including when Tatsuhei ends up stepping on something and messing up his foot. He steps right on a branch, and this might have stopped their going up, but she helps him and they get together, and they keep going. When they finally get to Nara Mountain, it is just covered by skeletons, and that's why I mentioned that if this was practiced, it was probably not practiced to the extent that this movie shows, because there is very little parts of the mountain that do not have bodies on it. It takes some pushing from Oren for her to get her son to leave, although he does eventually start heading back down the mountain, and Oren just kind of gets ready to die. As Tatsuhei is heading back down the mountain, he runs into the neighbor that is carrying the old man up the mountain, so that he can abandon his family member, and I don't think he went through the same ritual that Tatsuhei went through, or was told anything about it. And it's obvious that this old man does not want to be there. That is really told to us through the fact that he is tied up with ropes and struggling against his son. Tatsuhei is in a bit of shock of seeing this and how this fellow villager treats his father, and this has been a running thing throughout the movie, just how cruel this man is to his dad. But what really takes the cake in this case is when the son outright drops his father down the side of the mountain. It's very steep and the man is tied up. There is no way he survived that fall, and it's horrifying to watch. I've seen some horrible things in horror movies, but that kind of helplessness makes it so difficult. Understandably, seeing something like that sends Tatsuhei running back up the mountain to his mother. It has already started snowing, and she's already starting to get covered by this snow. Part of him running back is obvious concern for his mother. I think part of it is seeing something pretty awful and wanting support from Oren. And it's kind of heartbreaking how Tatsuhei really... He's like, "Are you warm?" And it's heartbreaking because he's asking this because he loves his mom, and Oren is just kind of accepting that she's probably going to die in a few hours. She's left completely exposed to the elements. It's snowing on top of a mountain. She keeps shooing him off, trying to get him to leave. Eventually he does leave. He heads back down the mountain, and he's with his family again. And life just kind of moves on, and it's sad. It's not bittersweet, it's just kind of bitter. Even though the movie was not the one I thought I was getting, it's good. I cannot recommend both versions of this movie enough. The original is a little less brutal and there's not nearly as much sex. The acting in both movies is phenomenal. I was horrified, though, to find out the woman that played Oren had 4 of her teeth removed for the role. I think that was not necessary, but good for her. She went for the role, and she was great in it. This is just an interesting story about the last year of a woman's life. She's put her whole life into this family, and even while she's preparing for her own death, it's still not about her. All her problems are a thing of the past. When her husband disappeared from the family, and we'll just ignore that her entire family's problems became her problems too. The one thing that stuck out to me was that Oren was in good health, and she was incredibly useful to the family and the rest of the community. She probably could have lived another 5 to 10 years, but the concept of how best to help her community was more focused on her taking away instead of her ability to give. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. This one was kind of a depressing one. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this video. It's my first video of the 2022 year. My next video will be on The Lodge. I am working on a series right now, which may take a while to make because I'm going to be making one video of quite a few movies. So look forward to that. You'll find out. So the next movie's The Lodge. My name is Amanda. This has been Horror Historian. I'll see you next time. What do you guys think of this movie if you have seen it? If you haven't seen it, go see it.